This week, Conflict Zone is in Brussels, where the European Parliament has backed a scathing report about the state of democracy in Turkey and warned against outsourcing the refugee crisis to Ankara. My guest is Turkey's ambassador to the EU, Selim Yenel. Instead of rejecting all the external criticism, isn't it time that his government took some serious notice of it? Ambassador, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Turkey's reputation received quite a slap from the international community yesterday, the European Parliament, a non-binding resolution criticising your record on democracy. You don't care about this, do you?
To a certain extent. As you said, it's a non-binding resolution and we're used to it. It has happened in the past before. And
so why not take some notice of it instead
we
of
do.
Dismissing it?
We don't dismiss it out of hand. There are points in which...
But pretty much.
Well, I mean, there are criticisms that we can accept, but there are certain points that are just going beyond our red lines. And those are the ones that we don't really, agree with.
Like backsliding in the rule of law and media freedom?
No, if you have listened to our minister with regard to what he has said, we take all criticisms very seriously. And we always look into them.
And you reject them seriously?
No, we rejected the document itself. We rejected it because it went too far with regard to certain issues, for example, the so-called Armenian issue of 1915. There was a resolution last year. It passed the parliament, but they didn't need to refer to it again in this report. It doesn't make any sense because we're talking about Turkey-EU relations. It has no place in it.
And what about the backsliding on the rule of law and the media freedom?
It was already mentioned in the regular report of the Commission. We're looking into it.
It's been mentioned for years, actually.
No, the backsliding has been mentioned only once last year. It's a very new phenomenon, and we're looking into it. And we need to come together with the EU.
What do you mean you're looking into it? It's either true or it isn't.
Well,
and it's coming from many, many different sources, isn't it? President Obama included.
Well, nobody said backsliding from them. No, people are criticizing us for certain things. This came out of the report last year from the European Commission, and we're looking into why.
Obama accused Turkey of shutting down democratic debate and repressing information. That's what he said earlier this year.
If you listen to Turkish television, Turkish broadcasting, it's very lively. Nobody has been shut down in that. I mean,
well, you're pretending Obama doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, it depends on what reports he gets from his people.
Well, he gets pretty varied reports, as you well know. He says, I think the approach that Turkey's been taking towards the press is one that could lead the country down a path that would be very troubling. I've told the president that directly. It's no secret there are some trends in Turkey that I've been troubled with.
Well, I mean, the Turkish debate is quite lively all around, but no more so than in Turkey itself. We're having a big debate in Turkey on many issues. So, I mean, it's difficult, of course, nobody knows Turkish, but you would be very surprised on the language they're using with regard to criticism of so many things.
It's one thing to have a debate, it's quite another thing to try to shut down democratic debate and repressing information.
Well, I wouldn't call it being shut down. As I see it, it's not been shut down at all, because if this continues, that means it's still working.
You're even taking issue with a German satirical singer, comedian, Jan Böhmermann, where you want to have a case against him for allegedly insulting the president. No sense of humor left in Ankara?
Well, I've seen that. To be a comedian, you need intelligence. And that kind of comedian, which brought on this kind of interesting issue, is bereft of any intellect himself. Because what I've seen is bordering on racism. It's disgusting. And even the Chancellor herself has agreed to turn it to the German courts.
She has, but she says she'll repeal the law that is being invoked here. But Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, has been pretty scathing about your President and his legal action. He said it's not acceptable for the President of another country to demand Germany limit democratic rights just because he felt caricatured. We have democracy and that's the end of it. Politicians have to live with satire.
You have to make a distinction between satire, caricature and insulting. This is insulting. I mean, if you have seen this video, it goes beyond any kind of freedom of speech. I mean, we have to, I don't want to say draw lines, but you have to make a distinction between what is an insult and what is satire. And that, I mean, if you want to have cheap points then you go in that direction. So that's why I said, you need intelligence to be a very good comedian.
But your president seems to feel insulted almost on a daily basis. What have we had? Turkish prosecutors have opened nearly 2,000 cases against people for allegedly insulting him since 2014. Cartoonists, academic, journalists, even school children, for heaven's sake.
Well, I mean, then they go to the prosecution, and if they're found legitimate, then they're prosecuted. If not, I mean, there's a lot of the cases that have been thrown out.
But he must be the most insulted leader in the world, or at least feel himself to be the most insulted. 2,000 cases since 2014. Can't he take a joke?
Well, I mean, it depends.
They can't all be so basically insulting to him, so seriously
satire,
damaging his character that he feels the need to launch cases after case after case.
Behalf, but I mean, satire and insults are different. That's all I can say right now. So you have to be careful on how you proceed on these things.
If you can't take the heat in politics, perhaps you should get out of the kitchen, shouldn't you?
He's taken a lot of heat himself.
Yeah, from a defenseless schoolboy, a 16-year-old schoolboy in Konya who had the police come in, take him away. It was only when 100 lawyers petitioned the court that they actually got him out. A 16-year-old schoolboy.
I think there's
he
a lot of
feels so
exaggeration
threatened
there.
by... There's no exaggeration. Those are the facts, Ambassador.
I'm not really sure about that.
I am. December 2014. Here we are. Mehmet Altunis said the president was the thieving owner of the illegal palace, as he put it. 100 lawyers had to petition the court to get him out. He feels so threatened by a 16-year-old schoolboy.
Well, he probably wasn't aware that he was 16 years old.
Oh, it would have been different, would it?
Well, of course. I mean, if he's legitimate.
You deny that there's a problem with the press. You deny that there's a problem with Turkey's human rights record. But
I don't deny any of that. I said that there are some issues that we're trying to correct them.
What are the issues then?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of accusations on Turkey with regard to the freedom of expression, freedom of press, these things.
Yeah, and you accept, are you accepting some of them?
We're looking into it. That's why we need the EU.
How long do you need to look into it? You know what the situation is in your own country.
The EU isn't helping us at all. I mean, they still haven't been able to open certain chapters that are looking into these things. We need a good dialogue. We're not having it.
But here's the European Parliament Special Rapporteur on Turkey, who said 5 months ago, for years the so-called progress reports have been regress reports. Fundamental rights like freedom of expression severely restricted. Numerous criminal proceedings against journalists, writers and social media users, as well as changes to internet that are not in line with European standards.
And we're trying to build on them. We need a reform process. The Prime Minister,
the President...
We are reforming, but we need the help of the EU. And
the EU is not helping us. You've been reforming for years.
Yes, but it's not
enough.
How long
does it take?
It takes a long time, it seems.
Why?
I don't know. You have to
ask the EU. It doesn't take a long time to jail journalists, does it, when you feel like it?
Or
16-year-old boys when they're said to be insulting the president.
Come on, I mean, we know that's not true.
Well, it's a fact.
The
boy was arrested. Are you telling me it's wrong?
I don't think that it's right.
Oh, well, we'll give you the report
at
the end. Okay. But do you think seriously for 1 minute that you are going to be able to join the European Union eventually unless this human rights issue is cleared up, unless these problems with the press are cleared up?
Well, there's a number of things, a number of challenges that we have to do before membership anyway, and this is one of them. Of course, we have to build up on our human rights record. We have to fill up the law, the rule of law. Well, we have other issues as well. But let me tell you that in the end, I mean, all membership procedures have been driven by interest. If it's in the interest of the EU to have Turkey as a member, that will happen. If not, it won't happen, even if you have the best human rights record.
You've talked about the EU turning its back on you for 10 years.
Yes.
You really do think that?
I mean,
you don't think it's the other way round?
It happened on the same time. We were trying to become as close as possible. What we got, Mr. Sarkozy, telling us that no matter what we do, even if we fulfill all the conditions, even if we, meet the challenges, if we solve the Cyprus issue, we're not European enough, and that, drove a wedge between us. And unfortunately, the reform process, everything just, withered. Now we're coming back because of the migration crisis.
Well, you say if we can reach the same standards as the EU, that's good enough for us.
It is.
How do you expect to reach those standards when you're hurrying in the opposite direction?
No. We have always had a reform process. That
You're
will continue.
passing legislation that's anathema to Europe. Your anti-terrorist law, for instance, widely criticised. The European Court of Human Rights found that specific provisions amounted to censorship and violation of freedom of expression.
Well, we're now going through that process, as you know, because we have to fulfill 72 conditions to have a visa-free regime. And amongst them is that law. So we are now going through it to meet the EU standards, to reach them, so that they will comply with the EU standards.
You're going to stop firing journalists. In 2014, one report said 339 columnists, journalists and media workers were laid off or forced to quit, often due to government pressure.
They were done by the owners. They were done by the owners.
No government pressure involved in it at all.
Well, I can't comment on that.
No government pressure on the numerous firings of judges, prosecutors, police officers who investigated things that might have been, let's say, embarrassing to the government? No pressure from the government on that?
I think what you're talking about is a totally different situation with regard to what has happened to the judges and the prosecutors. You know, we've gone through a period of what we call the parallel state, all these things. Of course, that has caused lots of consternation. So those are the things that should not be mixed up with the rule of law.
But every time they investigate something that's embarrassing to the government, they lose their jobs, don't they?
No, it's not the case.
Well, they have done. A lot of them have. Hundreds of them. Hundreds of police have been fired, particularly those who were investigating government scandals centred on the president and his family.
Well, it's not...
I mean, it's no coincidence that they lost their jobs, is it?
Well, I mean, I think that you have to look at the whole picture, because what we've seen is that there was some kind of attempt by some other organizations to infiltrate the government, the state, and those are the ones who have been fired. And I guess that issue is still going on, but it hasn't been well understood by the outside.
Human Rights Watch says that over many years, the politicized justice system in Turkey has perpetuated a plethora of abuses. But you say the justice system's working.
It is working. I mean...
What, with trumped-up charges against government opponents?
Well, we've seen that in the end, people have been, those cases have been thrown out. People who have been, accused of a lot of things. The justice system maybe works slowly, but they've been, in the end, I think, had a good result.
It wasn't a good result in January when more than 1,200 Turkish and foreign academics signed a petition highlighting problems with the military action in the southeast of the country. What did we have? We had 3 jailed, 30 dismissed, 27 suspended, and prosecutors opened immediate investigations, and the president called them all traitors.
Well, I mean, we have to look at the judicial system. That's what counts. And in the end, if they were found guilty, then they were guilty. But they will always go up to a higher court. And in the end, the judicial system, as I said, will probably give them the benefit of the doubt.
Dozens of these signatories were detained and harassed. Some of the academics' doors were even daubed in red.
They were accused of many things. And in the end, I mean, if they are innocent, then they'll be left off.
But as a matter of interest, Ambassador, I mean, you spend all your time in Brussels, you're your country's ambassador to the EU. Do you see this kind of behaviour going on in any other EU country?
Well, I mean, it depends on
this mass crackdown, this mass repression of people who actually just sign a petition.
We're seeing it only recently in the EU. Why? Because we've been fighting terrorism for a long, long time. And
this has got nothing to do with terrorism. This is academics signing a petition, isn't it?
Some of them has relations with terrorist issues. And now we're seeing this in
Belgium. You
Belgium.
know that for a fact?
Well, you speak for a fact. I speak for a fact as well.
No, but I speak based on facts that can be checked.
Well, so do we.
Really? And when you go to Washington, for instance, just over 2 weeks ago in Washington, when your president was visiting, his security agents reportedly beat up several hostile demonstrators on the streets outside the Brookings Institution. Do you think that endears you and Turkey
to the Western world? Like that should not be given a general idea. I mean, you can't just say that.
It was a pretty unusual thing to do, wasn't it? To cross over from one side of the road to the other and start tearing down posters of people demonstrating on Washington streets. Well, the Guardian newspaper was told that the institution was close to cancelling the event until the Turkish embassy in Washington stepped in and told the guards to back off. It sends a message that you feel able to try and clamp down on free speech, not just in your own country, but in somebody else's as well.
It's not about free speech. It's overzealous.
But they were demonstrating, weren't they?
Overzealous security guards, that's all.
I'm sorry? Overzealous security guards.
Probably.
One of the journalists said, I saw his security detail kick a man and saw a colleague roughed up. One of them came over to me in my face and called me a PKK whore. They started taking photos of me, which suggested they were trying to intimidate me.
I wonder if that's all true. I really do.
Yeah, but there was quite a lot of press there.
A lot of press, but I mean, there's only one incident that is being reported like that.
No, and there was Agence France Presse reported that one of the president's security men aimed a chest-high kick at an American reporter who was filming what they were doing.
And do we have that on film?
Agence France Presse does.
Like
Agence France Presse. But the idea that your security or the president's security would appear as thugs on a street in Washington is not something particularly that endears Turkey to the rest of the world.
Well, I don't think anybody can actually defend that kind of behavior, but I do hope that it's an isolated incident.
You hope it won't happen again?
Definitely.
When it comes to accession to the European Union, you talked about some of the chapters that have reopened. You talked also about the fact that you're working more closely with the European Union. The agreement in return for the deal over the refugees is to re-energize the accession process,
Right,
isn't it?
right.
That's the term that's used. Nothing more than that. It's pretty meaningless, isn't it?
Not at all, because the deal actually helps us normalize our relations. We've had not a normal relationship with the EU, as you can attest yourself. So we need to remotivate ourselves, both sides, come back together, and this has actually been the silver lining in this whole big migration crisis.
Process for almost 30 years.
That's right. And we're very patient. We're very patient, as you can see, because for us, the most important thing, as you just alluded to before, is to reach the same standards. In the end, if we don't have membership, so be it. But if we can reach the same standards, have the same quality of life in every respect, that's good enough for us.
The European Policy Centre pointed out last month the vast majority of EU countries are either critical or openly opposed to Turkey's EU membership. And even the current Turkish government president don't seem really convinced their country should join the Union. Are they right?
Well, nobody believes it will happen. As I said before, it's all about interest. Nobody's going to ask to have Turkey because of our beaches. No, if it happens, that means the EU needs us, which is a totally different thing than what has happened to some other countries. They are being brought back into the family, the Poles, the Czechs, the Slovaks. For us, we were always seen as an outsider, because for us, we always thought that we were part of the West after the 20s, 30s, 40s, especially after the Cold War, during the Cold War. But since then, after the Cold War ended, we were said, okay, you've done your job, now you can stay out. And this is something that, of course, opened up a lot of other thoughts in Turkey that, hey, we were not actually part of the family. We were not accepted into the European idea.
But there are a lot of things that you don't share with Europe, and let's talk about one of them. For instance, who's a terrorist and who isn't. You're a member of NATO, an extremely important member of NATO that doesn't accept the views of the rest of the NATO about which Kurdish groups are terrorists and which aren't, for instance, the YPG.
Is that the only thing that distinguishes us? Come on. There's so many things that distinguishes us.
But that's one thing, because effectively, if you're fighting against the YPG, which the Americans are supporting,
the YPG didn't exist a few years ago.
You're fighting a proxy war against your allies,
We're talking about long-term relationship with the EU, and you're talking about YPG, something that's very recent. Come on.
You're fighting a proxy war against your own allies, aren't you?
The YPG is an extension of the PKK, and they have their own
agenda. It's not seen
agenda.
like that by Washington.
I know. They have a different view. They're wrong. And the president, when he was in the US, said the same things to Obama.
And this kind of division plays into whose hands? This kind of division in NATO plays into the Russians' hands, doesn't it?
It does. It does, unfortunately. So we're trying to convince our partners that they should see who's a real terrorist.
The big concern expressed by many people, including the European Parliament, is, are you a safe country to return refugees to?
I really laugh at that one. I love that one. And you know why? Because they say that Turkey is a safe transit country, but not a safe country itself, meaning that it's not safe for Turks, but it's safe for the Afghans, the Syrians, and all that. This is ludicrous.
Well, I wonder why you laugh when, in the last 24 hours, Human Rights Watch issued a call to you to open your borders to Syrians who are fleeing ISIS and stop shooting at Syrian civilians. Why are you shooting at Syrian civilians?
We're not shooting. That report has not been substantiated. Even the Commission and other member states have said that they cannot accept this kind of accusation. We're not shooting
Human
at them.
Rights Watch don't make these things up.
Human Rights Watch is not very credible in this, are they? They're losing, unfortunately, they're losing ground on this.
They say civilians flee ISIS fighters. Turkey is responding with live ammunition instead of compassion.
The border is open, and it's not just one way. It goes both ways. People can come and go on our border. And we've saved so many people. We're the biggest country that has, the country that has the biggest number of refugees, 2.7 million, if not more. And they're all safe in Turkey. And what we're trying to do right now recently is to protect ourselves against ISIS. Some people are trying to infiltrate Turkey. We've had suicide bombers. We've had incidents in Istanbul and Ankara. We're trying to protect our borders. But we're not shooting anybody else.
One of those who fled a camp called the Iktar camp, which was overtaken by ISIS apparently, headed towards Turkey. He said, as we approached the border wall, we saw Turkish soldiers on a hill behind the wall, and they just started shooting at us. They shot at our feet, and everyone just turned around and ran in all directions.
I wonder who they were. I mean, maybe they were afraid that they were part of the ISIS. We don't know.
So you don't rule out that they could have shot at them and shot at their feet?
We're saying that if people are coming through unorthodox ways, not through the usual borders, then that can happen. We're doing much more screening now.
Amnesty International says Turkey has forcibly returned refugees to Syria.
We heard that report. It's unfortunately nonsense.
You're a very misunderstood country, aren't you?
Absolutely.
If everybody's writing nonsense about you.
No, not everybody's writing nonsense. These reports have come only recently, only after we had this migration deal. Why weren't these reports happening before? Why all of a sudden? You should ask that question as well.
Your human rights record has been criticized for years.
So we're an easy target.
It doesn't make you an easy target. It makes you a country that isn't doing anything about it.
On the contrary, why are 2.7 million and others are feeling safe in Turkey? Why are we getting kudos all the time?
How safe do they feel?
Well, you should ask them if they're still in the country.
Because some of them don't want to go back to Turkey at any cost, do they?
No. What are they doing? Look, all those people who have left Turkey to the Greek islands, which we haven't talked about yet, are going there for economic reasons. And they're selecting countries. They're not going to the EU. They're going to certain countries of the EU. They're going to Germany, Sweden. They don't want to even stay in France. They go out to the UK. They're very selective. They know what they want. They're not fleeing for their lives. They fled for their lives from Syria, but they want to have a better life. And if they can't have it in Turkey, they want, they've heard of good opportunities in Germany, better conditions. Why not?
Ambassador, let me just go back to the EU Parliament's criticism of your rights record and the bit which talks about the persecution of the Kurdish minority. As you know, there's been a lot of criticism of your military operations carried out in southeastern Turkey. Use of force described by human rights groups as abusive and disproportionate. You're a party to both the European Convention on Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which protects the right to life. Yes. The accusation is that you're not protecting the right to life. You're putting life in danger, civilian life in danger there.
Let me take issue with regard to what you said with regard to persecution of the Kurdish minority. That's not the case. It is the case that we are fighting a terrorist organization, the PKK, which has claimed thousands and thousands of lives throughout the decades. And this is what we're fighting. We don't have a problem with our Kurdish people.
And round-the-clock curfews aren't abusive, severing of public services.
In only certain areas, which are unfortunately controlled by the PKK, and we're trying to root them out now.
They're putting the lives of up to 200,000 people at risk and amount to collective punishment, according to human rights groups.
According to these groups, yes. These are alleged allegations. And unfortunately, what we're doing is fighting these terrorist groups. And these people have, unfortunately, again, put people at risk, civilians at risk, intentionally, to accuse us. The biggest Kurdish population is in Istanbul. We've had Kurds all around the country, and they are not at risk. What we are seeing is only a certain part of Turkey, a certain part of a certain city, which is going through this phase. And in the end, once we root out this unfortunate terrorist issue, then we'll all go back to normal.
Do you think the fact that you are in a war against terrorism gives you the right to do anything you want and to pay no attention to human rights that are enshrined in particularly the European Convention on Human Rights?
I think we're trying to protect our people at the same time, which is an extremely difficult thing to do, because the PKK doesn't care about human rights. We do.
But in November last year, the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights said, while I reiterate the right and obligation of the Turkish state to fight terrorism, the methods employed in this fight have to respect the the human rights guarantees enshrined in international standards. He felt it needed
Well,
to remind you of that.
Well,
but you seem to think it's an optional extra that you can junk when you feel like it.
It seems that they haven't fought against terrorism themselves. They don't know what they're talking about, because we're seeing this kind of behavior now in Belgium and elsewhere. Now that they've seen firsthand what terrorism means, we have to be vigilant. And you have to
You're not seeing 24-hour curfews. You're not seeing the lives of 200,000 civilians put at risk.
Well, fortunately, that's not happening in Belgium. It's not happening in these countries.
No, it's not happening in Belgium.
It isn't, because they don't have this terrorist organization that's fighting on the ground with so many people taking lives, jeopardizing people. They don't know what they're talking about, unfortunately. They're not seeing it day to day. So many people are losing their lives. Security personnel, military personnel, they're losing their lives. Nobody takes care of that. It doesn't make even third-page news.
Ambassador, good to have you on Conflict Zone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.